Hi, everybody, and welcome to Empowering Chats. And today I am already having a fabulous conversation with this individual, but I was excited to find him via Substack. And because I started writing articles for Substack, and this person, this lovely, lovely person, has been doing that for a while. And so I want to welcome Scott Mills. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This is just really fun. I was saying to you earlier, both your team and also the sweet way you opened the conversation with us with a really lovely meditation, um, are just a great gift. So I'm thrilled to see where we go.
Yeah. So Scott's Substack is titled Love and Other Survival Skills. Now, I got to tell you, I I'm being redundant maybe. I love that you said love and other survival skills because you're putting love first. And for me, that's all there is. That is all there is. And that to me, that's why each and every human being is here on the planet is to really uh, align with a high frequency of love and be that and shine that to each other. So I just appreciate it. It is, I think, actually the when people are aware of it, love is actually the ground we stand on.
If we're lucky. And it was really fun when I created the title for that. I don't know how many of you write. I've been writing since I was 12 years old. Um, and so sometimes clients will ask me like, what should I title things? And I'm always like, like it just comes to me. And I was actually working a client's, I have a client who's a love coach, written a beautiful book, really sweet human. And I was trying to come up with names for him. And this popped in and I was like, he can't have it. That one's mine. Um, it was like, it just felt like it was for me. And part of what I loved about the title is that I don't hear people talk about love as a survival skill. Um,
No.
I hear them talk about it as sort of a secondary thing that we get if we're lucky. But in fact, to your point, the way we connect with each other, the way we relate, if we're doing that in a way that's really relational, that's connective, instead of seeing each other as a thing or a transaction or a nuisance or all of the
Yep.
things that when we walk through the streets or we walk through our office and somebody says, "Hey, Susan, how you doing?" And you're supposed to say, "Fine, fine." Like they're, "Oh, don't talk to me." And God forbid you say, "Oh, I'm having a really hard day." Oh no, I've got to stop and now listen to that person. So to
Right.
me, like at the core of all of our experience is this sense of connection, of human community, of and beyond human community, the natural community that we're part of.
Yes.
So that's where that came from. It was this really deep understanding that love is actually the core skill that will help us survive the challenges we're in
Yes.
right now. It won't be strategy, it won't be business, it won't be pretty much any of the things people are pushing. It's going to be a love for the planet and for ourselves and for each other
Right.
that get us motivated to do something. Because that's,
Right. And I think I find, Scott, that I have two things to say about that.
yeah,
I find that a lot of people are still are looking for love outside of themselves as opposed to inside, because really that's where that frequency I like to talk about resides. It lands in our heart. And I've gone through so many life experiences, journeys, challenges, chapters, um, that I really had to learn how I got into my 50s and I didn't know how to love myself. Excuse me. I was the last person on the love list, of my love list. And so I really had to investigate who am I? How do I love myself? Which of course brought up, why didn't you love yourself? Blah, 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 all the habits and behaviors. But I'm finally, I would say 80 to 90% walking in my life, loving myself first. And I'm pretty happy about that because to have lived a majority of a lifetime without even recognizing that we're supposed to love ourselves first was, was very daunting when I realized and and I decided I was going to learn how to love myself, accept myself, respect. Now I'm working on nurturing myself, but I realized because I had a second half of life and I wasn't going to spend it doing the same old. So,
So can I tease you a little bit with that?
yes.
So this is a fascinating conversation. You were asking me a little bit about my background, and I have worked for about 20 years in the personal development world, and before that, much more communally. So my work
Hmm.
was rooted in doing social work, working in churches, in places where people gather. Personal development world doesn't have so much of that. So I don't think that either are negative. So when people say love myself first, love yourself first, I'm like, okay. But for me, I take this particle and wave distinction that we get from quantum physics. We
Hmm.
talk about when you see something moving, like an atom
Right.
moving, if you see it, if you literally see it as a solid object, a separate object, it's going to show up as a particle. It's in time. A wave is what you're going to see if you look over, a month, a year, a lifetime. So for me, when people are talking about the the desire and the need to love themselves, to respect themselves, to make good boundaries, which all to me are very healthy things to be doing, I see that as the particle expression
Oh,
because
yeah.
we don't exist outside of relationships. And I don't mean that as romantic relationships. I just mean relationships with each other, with the planet, with ourselves. We don't exist. We're um, disconnected, and it's one of the primary lies that most culture tells us these days is that we're somehow separate from each other, from the planet. And I look at these statistics, like the fact that 1 in 5 Americans, and I live in Mexico, so I don't do everything based on America, but England's having a similar problem. This is a Western countries. We can look at this in Japan. 1 in 5 Americans don't have even one friend they can turn to and talk to. You know,
No way.
isn't that depressing?
That's horrific.
So much so that in London there's a happiness czar. They've declared it a a countrywide health crisis because of the impact of being alone. So I always want to have people have conversations around both what it means to take care of yourself, but also to recognize part of taking care of yourself is to be in community with other people and
Yes.
literally co-regulating with them. Very
Yes.
biological term, this notion that, we sat down and I immediately felt comfortable with you, right? So that meant my shoulders dropped.
Mhm.
We did a little breath together, so our breathing started to match. And the longer we chat, unless we hit a place where maybe we disagree and maybe there'll be a little less, then we'll come back in. That's what humans do.
Yes.
So for me, like I want people to say yes to self-care, but yes and. Um, because so often the personal development world only tells half the story and
Yes.
sell the solutions as you just need a bubble bath and or a glass of wine or take a walk or all of these things that, are lovely self-care options, um, but often don't recognize like sometimes we actually need to just call a friend or
Yes.
need to take a walk together or so many things. So I don't think you and I are in any sort of disagreement around this. I just always want to bring in the full perspective.
Well, you're broadening the stroke, if you will.
Yeah,
You're painting it with a broad brush, which is important. And I think people are still traumatized because of COVID. So,
yeah,
even still today, I'm a big hugger. I like to hug. I like to be hugged. And if I approach somebody and they back off, I'm like, oh my God, you poor thing. But that's because that's part of human connection
yeah,
and relation and things like that. And okay. So, the other thing when you said when somebody says how are you and we respond with I'm fine, which is a distancer. I started I don't know, a little while ago. I start when people would say, "How are you doing?" I started telling the truth. Well, I've had a really lousy week. And it does arrest them. They're like, "Oh," but then they want to know, they want to listen. And it helps me to connect with them. And I might be sharing my story, right, of the lousy week or whatever, but it opens something up in them where they could say, I went through that. I went through that the month before. And again, like you're talking about, that interconnection, that co-connection, where we can recognize that we're not all vastly different. We're actually pretty similar in a lot of things that we experience and how we see the world, possibly. But you don't know if you're constantly putting that stop in. I'm fine. Just don't. I'm covering my heart as I'm saying that, Scott. But I and there's days where you don't want to share, but I'm finding if I tell the truth of where I'm at in the moment, that helps other people to tell the truth of where they are in the moment.
Oh, absolutely. When I was first starting out, I did a lot of support groups for mostly high school students who were struggling with all kinds of things. And we would always do a check-in. And sometimes the check-ins were go to we'd sit in a circle, often be in a room, but go to the front of the room and just draw on a piece of paper how you feel today.
Oh,
And
fun.
sometimes somebody would take a marker and just go up and be like, black space. Sometimes people would put a dot in the corner. Sometimes people would put giant, vibrant yellow swirlies, like I'm feeling very open. Um, Part of what I loved about that is it didn't take a lot of time for people to connect in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what you were talking about. It was they
Mm-hmm.
were having permission to express their truth of how they really feel. And so when I teach classes now, I bring that in because, it's virtual. The world has gotten virtual since um, I amusingly, about 10 years before COVID, I went totally virtual. So I've been virtual for a long time. And even before that, I was a university professor doing online education, designing stuff with Sloan Coffin. Um, but it's interesting to me in my classes now. What I do is I often have breakout groups and we ask the question, what's real for you today?
Mm.
And it's so different, and so one of the things I would encourage folks to do, if you want to break that barrier between how you do and fine, just pick another question. Because asking the question, what's real for you today,
Yeah.
it's a very different response than how are you doing? And part of that's just our training, right? It's habitual. We have learned when somebody asks us, how you doing? They don't, like here we go, hola, buenos días, ¿cómo estás? Oh, estoy bien, ¿y tú? Right? Oh, how are you? It's just part of the greeting, right? If you
Right.
want to talk to somebody in depth, you sit down with them. So it's fascinating to me if we just change that one word, or a few words, what's real for you today, or something different, because then um, it breaks the pattern a little bit. I was at an event a number of years ago for Mind Valley when I first put out this course with them, and big event in LA right before COVID, and people kept walking up to me, as Americans want to do, and saying, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I am so bored by that question, in part because it's hard to explain. I've been doing my work
Yeah.
for a long time, and partially because it feels, kind of habitual. And I started saying to people, "Oh, do you have a better question to ask me?" And it was so funny because it's something we interrupts the old pattern.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
were like, "What?" And sometimes people were a little jarred by that, but I said it
Yeah.
in a sweet way. Um, and people ask better questions. They ask people things like, "What are you passionate about right now? What are you dreaming about? What do you need right now?" We have so many better questions, and we take the easy way out. And let me just say, for anybody who's taking the easy way out, um, we're all overwhelmed right now. The world has
Yes.
been nuts. Even before COVID, but COVID, we're still, I spent all of COVID doing podcasts and talking to people and teaching about how we're in a trauma bath and we needed to find some ways out of it, but we didn't have a way out. we ended COVID and we just pretended it didn't happen.
I know. And that is like, to me, that's shocking because I was doing something, no, something similar, podcasting and having the conversation of, this isn't, there's no going back to normal because normal is no longer, So how are you going to be when you get to actually leave your house and, actually leave your house, go and connect with people. Don't just sit in your office doing your work thinking that you're contributing when you haven't had a heart-to-heart connection with somebody in a long time. And it was fascinating to me, Scott, how everybody just picked it up. I live in Ventura, California, and so the 101 freeway, I got out of LA, but it was the traffic quadrupled from what it was before COVID because all of a sudden people could be out and the craziness happened again. It was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, well, we did something really strange during COVID. We used this phrase socially isolate when really
Oh,
what we needed to do was physically distance or versus social distance. So, folks decided we need to pull back into our little compartments. Now, I was lucky. I was teaching thousands of people during COVID, and we just did these free retreats. I had a dear friend of mine who lives in Seattle come and help me. And, we would have people showing up from hospital beds at 2 in the morning in London or wherever they might be, literally all around the world. Just teaching this resilience work that I do. And mostly co-regulating, just creating spaces where people could come in and say what was real. So for us, we had a lot of connection because we chose not to socially distance. We physically distanced,
right.
which is still hard because humans require connection to each other physically as well as socially. But it's interesting. I just want to put this in a little bit of larger context. Um, this is not a new thing. This is something that's been running since the 60s in the US at least. Robert Greene, oh gosh, I may have just misquoted the person. So the title of his book is called Bowling Alone in America.
Oh,
Sociologist who was writing about the collapse of the common space between us. And he was talking about how people went bowling alone, instead of on leagues, and churches have declined, and other religious institutions and communal institutions. All of that's been happening since at least the 60s in the US. If you follow Brene Brown, she picked up that research and has used it as a pretty deep foundation of her work as well. So we have a long history, and I would arguably say that the US is built on genocide and destruction of other humans and slavery, all of which, similar to COVID, we just pretend it didn't happen.
right.
So all of that, is in kind of in our land, in the ground of our being. So this disconnection we're feeling, I think we simultaneously get the collapse of institutions that held us together. Um, we get movement at a level that no civilization has known before. Like people just move. Like I went from Virginia, where I was a small town. I grew up outside of DC, but my family was from small towns. But relatively naive, moved to LA at 21 on my, no, actually, yeah, 21 on my own to go to grad school. Drove out with my mom in my tiny little Geo Metro. If folks remember those, they were sort of like
Yep.
lawnmowers, um,
Yep.
about the same energy. But we were able to move these massive distances. I've lived, this is the third country I've lived in. I'm in Mexico now. I've lived in Canada. I've lived in the US, traveled all over the world. So there's some beauty in being able to do that, but there's some ways in which every time we leave a place that we've known people, we lose our anchors. So
Yeah.
the US is in many ways and well beyond the US. Like I do these conversations all over. Um, we have been in a Yahtzee cup for quite a while. Everything's
I
getting
love
shaken up,
that.
you know,
Yep.
and we're in what a lot of sociologists would call the in-between times.
Yes, the liminal area.
And it's interesting to me because you see it showing up from psychologists, from astrologers, I mean, like really the weirdest different kinds of people. Economists will have this conversation, sociologists, anthropologists. We're all talking about what happens when one set of stories collapses and a new set of stories has to emerge. Um, so that to me is, when you talk about like post-COVID and all the ways we're disconnected, um, we kind of have to open ourselves up a little bit to say, wow. And here's the reason for that. If we don't open up ourselves to the context of history, which Americans are not good at because we learn history in a very dumb way. Apologies to history teachers, but what I learned in high school as a student was to memorize dates, to memorize, people who were influential in wars. I didn't learn movements. I didn't learn the way that culture moves over time.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happens when you learn that, you don't see the wider wave, you don't see the wider context, is you start to think there's something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me because either I'm not coupled, which is a humongous thing that's been going on in the Western world. Recently, tons of people just giving up, deciding they're going to sit out the dating scene. Um, I may not have friends. I may not have the kinds of work relationships I want. And I look and I think, oh, something must be wrong with me that I can't create these relationships. But when you actually start to say, our entire culture is built on isolating people, on disconnecting folks because we buy a lot more stuff when we're feeling sad and somebody says, "Hey, wouldn't you like to go on Amazon Prime Week and buy a whole bunch of things?" They're bunches of little dopamine hits.
Yes, they are. And that's so, you just like, oh, like my perspective just shifted by 1 degree because I had not seen it that way, but I think you're absolutely right. This idea of isolating uh, individuals, but isolating groups and isolating cultures and scapegoating,
Yeah.
it has been at the very, since they got off the Mayflower and they founded Jamestown, and and those are my ancestors that came over, but and they were the ones that left because they were being scapegoated. And then they come here and they plant the same modality, the same way of being, and scapegoat other people who are different from them, even though that's what they left because they didn't want to be scapegoated. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. And it's not an American phenomenon. So, if you look at historical texts, and when, I have to say this because it's just goofy. When I first started teaching, I taught a class that was world history starting at uh, 5000 BCE
well,
going to the present. So talk about like it was two semesters, but talk about looking at the context of the world. If we look at texts from around the world, we will see people othering each other, and I make these verbs, othering and belonging each other. Um,
yeah,
so we'll see people othering each other historically for all of the history of humankind. And there's some beautiful exceptions, but we do that all the time. And in our context right now, um, and when I say our context right now, I'm thinking we're in a very chaotic political time. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of distrust. All of that takes the nervous system into what we like to call red brain, danger brain, um,
yeah,
survival space. Anytime we're in survival, humans go very comfortably into that othering space. And we do it for very good reason. It's, is the tiger across from me going to eat me or going to come sit down beside me and purr? Probably not going to purr. It's probably going to eat
right,
me. And if
right,
I don't have deep connection with people, if I don't know that tiger, I've never seen it before, I'm never going to sit down next to that tiger. I'm going to go, oh, tigers are terrible. And then I'm going to start to generalize and say, well, okay, tigers are big cats, so maybe all cats are terrible. And then I'm going to start to say all animals are terrible. This is something that happens in our brains as a survival mechanism. And kind of to add insult to injury, we tend to co-regulate to the people around us. So if we're in a group where the primary way of surviving is to other people, is to make you different and say, well, we're our safe little group. And there's
yep,
some merit in that, right? At least there's some merit in owning your safety. Like, yes, when I'm with my peeps, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Um, the trick becomes if I make it just my peeps forever, we get stuck. But if I start to say, yeah, I belong here in this group, and we understand that nature and the nature of the universe is to include, then we start to join that party and we start to go, oh, well, we identified who we're connected to. Now we can see how we're connected to so many other people. But to
Right.
me, this is just a human experience that we get to make choices around.
Yeah.
Um, but very, very difficult to make choices when we're sitting in our living rooms by ourselves, just because we're all by ourselves. Anytime we're all by ourselves, we feel unsafe. Let me just give you a quick example, and I know you have a lot to say around this. But I went camping a few years ago, which I'm not a camper. Give me like a hotel room. Doesn't have to be
Yes,
fancy,
thank you.
but I'll go hiking in the woods, but I want to sleep where there's no animals. Um,
Yep.
had I gone hiking and sleeping outside in a tent by myself, every sound I would have heard would have probably been translated to that must be a bear coming to eat me, even if it
Uh-huh.
was a squirrel in a tree outside. As soon as I camped with friends, which is the only way I'll ever do it, I think 6 or 7 of us went, I knew that I was okay because other people would be watching out for me as well. And then I started to say, oh, there's some campsites around here too. And I'm thinking of a particular trip where there were brown bears. And so brown bears are afraid of people and noises. So
Yep.
the folks nearby us would bang pots together, clang, clang,
Yep.
clang.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
We didn't see the bears, but we heard the other people. So we could relax a little bit and say, oh, we belong to the tribe of people over there who are also watching out for bears. So now I'm not just myself and my little group. We're a web of groups that are surviving well with each other and having some common respect and care for each other. So
Yeah.
all of this to me, we tend to look for solutions in a self-help book or a glass of wine or a TV show or whatever will distract us or move us out of things. And we all think we're broken somehow. Like something I have to fix. Um, the reality is we're all quite whole, at least if you
Yes.
start with from the Buddhist context, which I do. We're all quite whole, but we're all quite lonely. And when we start to connect with each other, all of those walls, or at least some of them, start to come down. And we can say, oh, well, maybe I am okay. Maybe there's 4 of us, and if you watch for bears now, I'll watch in the next hour, and you'll watch in the next hour. To me, that's the hope for us, is that we are built for collaboration. We're built for connection. Um, so that's the larger context that I always want to bring in so that folks can give themselves a little bit of a break and say, oh, so this is probably not unbroken. This is probably something wrong with the culture that we're living in. And when culture is broken, humans create culture. And so we can adjust it, but we adjust it together.
My dog is barking because there's a gardener out front. I'm so sorry, everybody.
No,
Um,
let
but
me just throw something in here. What for people who are listening to the dogs bark, when I teach meditation, I tell my students, and I was very worried when I moved to Mexico because the first place I lived was San Miguel de Allende. And there were literally every morning when I woke up, roosters that would start about 6 o'clock. Now I usually wake up before the roosters, so I just thought it was fun. And then the dogs would start barking to welcome the roosters. And so I had my students coming in and I teach these deep meditation practices sometimes, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's going to ruin things. And then I said to my students, I said, our minds are full of barking dogs
that's
all
true.
the time. So if you have a barking dog in your mind or in your neighborhood, just say, oh, it's a dog barking and keep going. And that's how I learned meditation when I first did it. You would say, if there's noise, okay, noise, okay, dog. So I would just invite your little pup to be welcome to the space. Mine is sleeping next to me. Um,
Yeah, well, she was sound asleep, and then the gardeners,
the gardeners came for them. They came to visit her. I love
But that you bring up a really good point about welcoming
it.
what is, which helps you become more present with what is. And so many of us have been avoiding what is. like you mentioned with the shopping or the watching TV or the, stuffing your head full of social media memes and stuff like that. But to welcome what is, the, what years ago I was an actress. And in acting class, I remember, you do a scene with somebody and you get two chairs. And the scene is you're in bed with the other person, right? Well, you have to imagine that the chair you're in is actually a bed. So a thing is what it is. It's a chair. But once I recognize and accept that it's a chair, I can convert it into whatever it is with my imagination to something else that is maybe better or more useful. And you guys, these are spiritual principles too, because what we're witnessing looks like it is what is. What we're witnessing in America right now looks like what it is, right? And we can change that by using our skills within ourselves, not just oh, I'm just going to pretend like it's not there. No. But what we're talking about is also correlating, but collaborating. And that is part
Hmm.
of, to me, where the future is. I just like did a whole jump, Scott. Sorry. But, to me,
No, you're good.
there's no mistake that we are recording the show on July 1st. There is no mistake to me because and I, because America is uh, celebrating. That's an odd word to use these days for me, but celebrating 250 years of this country. And in order for us to move forward as a country, as a nation, we're witnessing and seeing so many different things collapsing all over the world. But there is something that has to be, I don't know if it has to be undone, Scott, but reimagined, It's like let's reimagine it in another way. Let's begin to collaborate, work together to see where we really are going, as opposed to repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, The old adage, history repeats itself. Well, let's stop that, to me. Let's stop history repeating itself in the ways that have not created community, like you're talking about, Scott, have not created um, respect and loving kindness, because we're not seeing that. We might see it in our small little church communities. We might see it there, but that's part, la, 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 la. I'm going there, Scott. When you said, now I'm bouncing off the walls. That's ridiculous. But when you talked about that you had taught history 5,000 BC, there is
Hmm.
where it all began in many ways. The patriarchal, hierarchical system that we are now unwinding from, or just blowing up, because there's a new system, or it's an ancient system that human beings, like you're talking about, live in a community. Commune means to be together, and that's how we need to move forward, not in separating out the others, talking about belonging, but being in a connection that helps us to re it's not even read, because that seems to be doing it over again, but to create or co-create a better world that works for everybody, a better nation that is more aligned with all the people that live here, not just not just, excuse me, Scott, but not just the white men.
Yeah.
And my partner is a white man, and I have to apologize to him all the time, because this is part of what began BC well, maybe they weren't white men, maybe because they were in,
They weren't white.
yeah, they were everywhere. So it's just this masculine patriarchal quality that got abused and then became what it is today. And in America, it's a white man, a white man
Yeah.
thinking. So
Well,
I don't know
and
why
let's
I
be really
bounced around
clear.
like that.
That's all good. It's part of the nature of the conversations we're having these days. Um, so I will be much more specific. It's white men is a concept that hooks to power, and white men
Yes.
have varieties of. So, when we're looking at something like the Epstein class, um,
Hmm.
that's a very different kind of white man. It's connected to money, and I would suggest that probably money and power are bigger influences, but the US, obviously white males have been
Yeah.
um, the top of the heap. But if you're a poor white guy, it's very different. Or if you're a queer white male, or if you're a trans white male, um, there's levels of privilege, um,
Yes.
which are multi-alien and fascinating. So anyway, that's just like a little caveat because I think sometimes people get caught in the wake of white men as if all white men are bad. And I know that's not what you're saying. I'm an advocate for nuance and for really just saying, look, well, let's sit with that. What does that look like? Um, and it seems to be white, powerful, wealthy. We put those adjectives in,
Yes.
things start to shift. I want to talk for a minute though around what you were saying. There's two other things that I think are collapsed. You said a lot of things are collapsing. I want to mention two things that we don't usually bring up inside of that conversation. The first is collapsed time. Collapsed time, which means
Yes.
whenever we're in survival, this moment tends to become every moment to us. It's sort of like if you've ever left your dog at your house for a while and maybe you've left for 5 minutes versus 5 hours. It's the
Uh-huh.
same for them. These kind of
Same.
toddlers' time.
Exact same. Yep.
Where have
Yep.
you been for that 4 minutes? It felt like forever. So
Yes.
when
Yes.
time passes, it means that we're we're disconnected from the larger history. And in America particularly, we only learn the war history. So collapse time looks like we've lost all our anchors or all of our roots to anything bigger than ourselves. So time and history is not linear in the sense that so many people would like it to be. Like this thing happened,
Right.
and then we progressed to something else. But it's full of resource. So we can go back, whether that's to matriarchal traditions, which honestly are far more complex than most people have made them sound. Um,
Hmm.
we can't go back to matriarchal traditions. We have to because we don't live in the same kind of world that we used to live in,
Exactly.
right? There's
Exactly.
8+ billion people on the planet. Smaller, kind of more ancient traditions were based on very small communities that could know each other. And I
Hmm.
don't know what the answer is, by the way. So I'm not advocating for a particular answer, but I'm advocating for exactly what you're suggesting, which is to be present to what is. For me, and that's a very Taoist concept, the beginning of all change happens when we say, what's actually happening right now? What are we feeling? What are we thinking? What's happening to the community? What's happened to the planet, the rivers, the trees, the lakes? So we've got, in one sense, a sense of collapsed time, and also we've got a sense of collapsed self.
Mm.
So we have lost the sense that humans don't exist outside of relationship. Now, it doesn't have to be a familial relationship. Some people say, oh, my family rejected me or was horrible to me or holds beliefs that are or ways of being that are really negative. I don't mean your biological family, but I do mean that the self does not exist outside of relationship. And we have continually bought into this notion that we're somehow separate. We're
Yes.
separate from other humans. We're separate from this planet we live on. Um, and to me, those two are the beginnings for real movement. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were trying to figure out how to kind of play with this metaphor of where are we and where we're going. And ideally, we'd like to say, you know, the what is we're right now, like you happen to be in California, I'm in Mexico, right? We can say that with some degree of certainty. We may not know our little Google map pin numbers off at the top of our heads, but we know what state we're in. We know what
Mhm.
area we're in. The place that it gets interesting is it's a little bit like if you read, well, let me say this, if you read traditional self-help, you read business books, you see folks say, decide where you want to go. So when you know where you are, it's a lot easier to know where you want to go. Totally true, right? Where
Yep.
you're in California, if you wanted to go to New York, knowing you're in California will help you know not to go west because it's the wrong way.
Yeah.
Um, what gets interesting to me is it feels a little bit more like we're on a plane that's left from wherever we were. We're somehow overhead now, and we don't know where the final destination is.
That's correct.
And none of
Yep.
us know what this looks like, because it's going to be different. It's going to be an evolution.
Yes.
Um, and even when you say things like to have our country be strong again, I look at the US and think, well, maybe part of what's happening is a call for a much more global culture instead of having one bully on the playground who has lots of money and weapons and
Yes.
can dictate the games everybody else is playing. So
I
there,
would agree with that.
yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a course correction happening. And so it may very well not be back to anything that the country has looked like or any country has looked like. Um, that to me is a much more communal context.
Makes a lot of sense to me, Scott. It does. And I think we are living through that. And what I mean by living through that is we are growing because of everything that's happening. Hopefully, we're all growing and learning new, better ways, different ways to communicate with other individuals that are different from us, or that aren't in our small community, but yet are part of a larger community that we are also involved with. So yeah, I think that we are on a course correction and we don't know where the destination is
Yeah.
yet.
And I think, some of us are expanding. I think when there's anytime there's new information, which
Yeah.
happens when you put an internet on the planet and all of a sudden people can see each other. Um, we're talking from a couple thousand miles apart. We can read the stories or watch the movies of other people. Whenever new information comes in, PJ called this cognitive dissonance, but it's
Uh-huh.
something is uncomfortable. Sort of
Yeah.
like we get a rock in our shoe. It's like, there's something doesn't feel right here. And it doesn't mean it's negative, it just means something doesn't feel right. Um, when we're in that space, depending, I think, on the way we've lived our lives up till now, we'll either contract or expand.
Mm-hmm.
Contract goes into the space where I don't care about those other people. These are my people, and I'm taking care of my people. And I think you're seeing a ton of that in the
Yeah.
US, in England, in Germany. There's a little bit of it going on in Portugal, which was really disappointing to learn recently. Um, that's one of the countries I looked at immigrating to, and I just love Portugal. But we can either contract and say, like, get closer to our people, um, or we can expand and do this collaboration that you're talking about, this inclusion, where we start to say, yeah, those people are different than me, but isn't it amazing they've got all this different food and different colors,
Yeah.
different ways of living, and I think I'm so thankful that I've had those different folks, because I would never have known about Indian food, which is one of my favorite things on the planet. Um, I would have never known about so much interesting international music. I would have never met so many people and got to hear their stories.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's from people who are fundamentally secure, um, and feel like they belong somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
in a safe way where they're allowed to be themselves and still be part of the community. I think a lot of the folks who go the other direction, who start to contract, have been parts of communities, if they're lucky, that um they may not have been any part of any community, but if they're part of some community, the community often says it's us, it's all about us, and they turn inward instead of outward. So I see both going on fairly radically, and we know that when chaos happens, that people regress, to often to states that are lower than where they've been.
Yeah, yeah.
So
A
I think
lower
that's a normal thing.
frequency. Yeah, yeah. So in this regression, you've written about it, that there is a place where there's a tension that happens where one person's contracted and one person's more open, but there's a tension between that.
Mhm.
It creates the tension. It might even the differences create the chaos too, if you will. But with between that in that tension, there is a third solution. There is always a third solution that comes out of feeling seemingly nowhere, but that's what's called synergy, where we have to be when we hold where we are so tightly, it's hard to see where we could go.
Mhm.
And when you're both on different ends of the spectrum kind of thing, different sides of the fence, that it's hard to see where you're going to go. But if we can open enough or trust enough, and that's a hard word for a lot of people too, me included, but there is a third solution that will always um, come make itself apparent or lead us to another way of being, if you will, or decision or whatever that we hadn't thought of. Um, it feels like that's kind of where we're at right now, that tension.
Yeah, and I want to say to anyone who's listening and they feel like they're in that tension and one group is threatening to you,
Hmm.
because this is not about political spectrums or sides of the fence. Um, the it's been so difficult during this period because personally, when folks don't think that other people have the right to exist,
Yes.
which there's quite a few people that think that right now, um, for the people who are being told you have no right to exist, the answer is not to try to find synergy. The answer is to try to find safety, find belonging. So you have permission, not from me, from yourself, but yes, I'll give you permission if you need it, from me. But you have permission if you're listening to this and you're saying, these people are unsafe to me. If you're in a state where it's not okay for you to have reproductive rights, if it's
Right.
not okay for you to be treated like a human being, where you're told you can't go in a bathroom because somehow your very existence threatens other people, get safe first.
Right.
When we're in this level of chaos, your responsibility is not to be the bridge to the people who want to destroy you. Now, so to me, that always has to be said. And
Yes, and I agree with that.
yeah, and I
It's
say
not, and I'm not advocating that.
no, I
Uh,
didn't hear you saying that, but it's a
okay.
place that people can hear what you said
Yeah.
and feel, particularly the folks we're talking about, like the folks that I work with tend to be highly sensitive, highly intuitive. They've often grown up with some degree of childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Um, if for no other reason that they were just different,
Yep.
they were often neurodivergent, they looked at the world differently. And so generally the belief is I'm different, so I have to change to make this work. Um, and that's, something all abused kids will often think of. Mommy and daddy are fighting and they're being crazy. If I could just be better, maybe this would be better. And we do that
Yes.
because it's the only place we have any power. But it's important for people who have thought they need to be the bridge to recognize you can be the bridge, but it might not be safe for you to be the bridge in this moment,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
maybe need to be a bridge from another country.
Hmm.
Just had a mass exodus of
Yeah.
people, which has been completely underrepresented. But if you spend any time outside the US, you will run into expats from all over the US, and the numbers are quite staggering how much it has risen in the last year and a half. Um, so the first thing I think we've got to notice is you get the choice to be safe. Um, and the second piece is just to acknowledge that this spectrum idea is total nonsense. People say sides of the fence, like I'm on a different side of the fence. No, if I look at you and you're a Republican or Democrat or Green Party or Labor or Tory or Whig or I don't care. If I look at you and I say we both have the right to exist, We both have
Yes.
the right to breathe air, to have basic needs met, to be cared for, to be happy. That's different than when somebody stands on the other side and says, you don't get to breathe. That's
Yeah.
Nazi Germany. That
I know.
and
I
so
totally get it.
yeah,
You know, when people were voting Mr. T in the first time, the very first time, and I remember I was talking with a friend of mine who's a medium, and I'm like, how do people not see this? She's like, I don't know, but you see it. I said, yeah, this is Nazi Germany. They're not goose stepping around, but they're goose stepping, you know? And now we're living through it. And it's while it's frightening, it's also astonishing to me that people have drank the Kool-Aid, that they drank the Kool-Aid. And these are some of my friends drank the Kool-Aid. And I'm like, oh boy,
I don't know if you know James Clear's work. He's an
no.
unlikely person to turn to for understanding a little bit of this, but James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits. Um,
Ooh,
and it's just a lovely little book about how to shift your habits in your life. But there's a chapter in that book, which is probably the most important section of it, where he talks about why people relate to certain folks. And now I've done a lot of study on this. I've like tried to understand it for years. When I was in grad school, I did a independent study for a semester on theodicy, which is the study of evil, and I looked at child abuse and Nazi Germany and trying to understand. Um, when we get into these places, let me see how to say this. Um, how do I want to say this? I'll just make this simpler. I think that the two things he would point out, one is we connect to people because we're already in that party. So if we're the Epstein party, we're
yeah.
obviously, going to say, "Yay, let's keep all this stuff hidden. Let's keep all this stuff secret. Let's maintain our privilege and our power." So there's one group of people who already stand in power. There's another group of people who seem to have voted against their own best interest. And I watch this
Mm-hmm.
again and again in the US. I've been shocked by the number of times, for example, people will be asked, do you believe in Obamacare? And they'll be like, no, no, we should repeal that. But if you ask the same people, do you have insurance with the ACA, which is the American Affordable Care Act? Uh,
Yes, affordable. Yeah.
Affordable Care Act, and they'll be like, yes, it's amazing. But they'll vote against having Obamacare, which means that their children, their grandchildren may not have access to medical care. They voted against lunches in schools and
Mm-hmm.
been in favor of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these folks are clearly voting against their own interest. I was just watching a Senate candidate for Louisiana the other day,
Yeah.
and she was saying that the difference in life expectancy, and this shocked me, I hadn't seen these statistics, but between Boston and Louisiana, or Massachusetts in general, is 10 years. So people in
Wow.
Louisiana die 10 years earlier than
Wow.
people in Boston or in Massachusetts. So if you want to
Right.
say like where is this against our own best interest, even to the level of life is shortened, not even talking about quality of life. James Clear thinks that those people connect to people in power um, the same way people will support the bully on the playground who's making fun of somebody who's weak because they become powerful by association. And I think there's some
Oh, it makes my stomach turn over, Scott. I'm just like, oh,
it's awful, but it's helpful to understand
yeah,
some
yeah.
of like and I think there's a lot of racism and homophobia and misogyny that have run rampant in the US and many other countries for a long time, which is in there too. But the folks who are kind of voting against their own interests, I think are often doing it so that they can have a place to belong and somebody might protect them. Um, which is shocking because they're not being protected. The
No.
things that are being done are
Yeah.
harming them. Gas prices are through the roof. Health
Mm-hmm.
insurance has been canceled. Food prices
Mm-hmm.
are high. And yet there's still people defending a lot of the actions that are going on. Um, So it's been fascinating. And I have to say a lot of the reason that I'm putting so much of our conversation in a larger cultural framework is because there's something about seeing why is it that somebody would vote against their own interests or would support somebody who clearly doesn't support their family's well-being or their own happiness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I have to do that at a cultural level because individually, fairly easy to understand that piece. But but then when you start to look in groups, and I say fairly easy because as soon as people are isolated, they're going to look for power to connect with.
Yeah.
Because somehow you got to be safe.
So being isolated, this is interesting to me too. So having gone through an isolation period, then people came out like of COVID, let's say, looking for power, somebody in power to protect them, take care of them.
You got to go backwards a little bit. So COVID is not the marker that people think it is,
Okay.
at least in terms of isolation. We were long before that, like
Yeah.
un, you know, lonely, disconnected. When I'm talking about isolated, I mean being in cities where we don't have friends, or towns. I mean, we said earlier, 1 in 5 Americans feel like there's nobody they have to turn to. That's like this.
That's huge.
Well, and if you look at the statistics around things like let me see if I can remember this correctly. Somebody's going to listen to this and look it up and find out I'm a little bit off, and that's okay. But feel free to post it in the show notes. But if I remember correctly, the effects of loneliness are the equivalent of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Research
Ooh.
is very close in terms of the implications for our health. Um, we live in a country where we don't see our coworkers after work. We don't have social institutions we connect to. We often go home and we watch TV.
Yeah.
We have small pockets of friends. Isolation is both a phenomenon that's developed out of the just the cultural circumstances of the US, but
Mm-hmm.
also in many ways intentional. Um, Much easier to control a population that isn't connected. If we
Right.
look at Minneapolis, part of what was so beautiful about Minneapolis, I mean, as horrifying as that experience was to watch, way worse to be a part of it, I'm sure. I have several friends who live in Minneapolis, and I was calling them and checking up, and just their level of fear. But what was beautiful is we actually saw the emergence of community coming back out. We saw
Yeah.
people who were delivering groceries to people who were afraid to go somewhere to get them. We saw like restaurants become soup kitchens, and
Mm-hmm.
people gave free meals away to anybody who needed them. There were so many examples of what happens when community, real connection emerges, and it had nothing to do with what you can buy on Amazon. It had,
Right.
there was no purchase price for that. It was literally just, I'm going to look at you, even if you have a different color skin, or you're a different age, or you're skinny and I'm fat, or you came from a different place. All of these things that we use to other each other.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and instead, people in Minneapolis chose to belong to each other. And they said, yes, you may be from a different country, you may speak a different language, you may have a different background, but we are all humans here. We are all connected. And what we do to one, we do to all.
So perhaps that's why we're going through what we're going through. And I always look for a why, Scott, and not that that helps me, but perhaps that's why we're going through what we're going through, because it's bringing us to a place of I need more, I need connection, I need to help. In my wanting to help someone, then I begin to participate in a community larger than me, myself, and I.
Yeah, so imagine if you were somebody who breathes, which I hope most of the people on this call are people who breathe. I don't know, we've got a lot of AI now, so maybe some listeners
Oh
are
no.
AI. Um, but if you breathe, if you think about what we have done is inhale, right? If you just keep inhaling, the logical conclusion is you will eventually, and not even very long from now, you'll pass out.
Right.
We as a species require collaboration,
Yep.
require connection, which is the exhale. And so many of us are holding our breath
Yeah.
And we feel it. It's interesting. I wrote a little piece not too long ago called "You Are Not What They Named You," and
Oh, I love that.
it was specifically for people who are neurodiverse. I was listed as or identified as gifted probably since about 2 years old. Later figured out that I was ADHD, and I don't say these as diagnoses, just as ways to understand that my brain works a little differently than some people.
Yeah.
Um, in the sense of you are not what they named you, I was just simply looking at the fact that we're so different as individuals, as um, people, but there's a way that we can connect to each other. There's a way that we can find each other. So to me, that's where I'm hoping we're going, is to look at each other and say, yeah, you're not the scary thing that we named you as. You're not we name people all the time that we don't want to deal with. Homeless people are scary. They're mentally unstable.
Yeah.
All these things. I did a program years ago with kids who were homeless, to write their own theater production about their lives called I came in at the tail end. Norma Bowles actually did the work. It's amazing. I just got to help a little bit. But there's a beautiful video called Surviving Friendly Fire. And it was the stories these people told, these kids who were living on the streets, of their real lives. As soon as we see each other as real, something happens where we can't look across and say, you're not somebody I want to talk to. I have a hard time personally with the why. I look for whys in terms of what motivates people, what would cause certain
Yeah.
behaviors, but kind of in a global scale, I don't know that there's a why um, in the way that people are most often asking this question. I would see this much more like a biological system question. We
Ooh, I
we're in a
like that.
system that,
Yeah.
like, our bodies are systems. Any kind of forest is a system. If you poison a system for long enough,
Hmm.
the system's going to have a response. Now,
Hmm.
maybe like there's a few little toxins that come through one day, you smoke a cigarette, you have a Twinkie or whatever. Um, it's going to be a kind of able to be um, taken into the system and kind of accommodated for.
Hmm. Hmm.
But if we do something long enough, the system has to have a response.
Hmm.
To me, what's happening is we have understood humanity as if we are separate from each other and the planet we live on. We actually
Yep.
talk about nature as other, which is
Yep.
just nuts. Like
Yep.
every part of our bodies comes from nature. Uh,
Yep.
we're Satguru calls it food bodies. We eat a carrot, it becomes our bones, it becomes our hair, it becomes our skin.
Hmm.
Every part of us is dependent on nature, but we have pretended that wasn't true for a long time. We've polluted our soils, we have messed with nature so that we've got global warming. So what I look at is I look at the system and go, oh, the system is giving us all the information we need. It's time to course correct. um, so the why is we've abused the system too long,
Yep.
and now it's demanding change or
Yep.
ushering us out.
Or it is already in its metamorphosis experience as it becomes something else. Um,
Partially, but I think the planet, if we the planet doesn't care about humans.
no,
um,
but in Margaret Wheatley wrote about this in a couple different books that in 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 the natural world,
mhm,
if there's you know two things living next to each other and one begins to die, the other one begins to take on some of the properties that were healthy, and it becomes a new thing.
mhm.
I read this years ago, Scott, so I'm pulling out from brain cells at the very back that maybe are firing. But maybe perhaps when you said a biological system, look at it that way. That's what I saw is what's occurring globally, in all the various cultures that are at war or whatever's going on, collapsing, that it's happening because there is a toxicity that we have finally reached that is now causing a brand new metamorphosis, into something else. And I'm hoping and praying it's going to be something better because I have a 1 year old granddaughter who's amazing. I want her to have something better, every generation does. But perhaps maybe that's what's going on, it's just that our system is transmuting. Who knows?
Maybe, but by necessity, it would have to.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
8 billion humans on the planet. Um, and if we would think of it like just as a dog, the dog is not particularly concerned with fleas until there's 8 billion fleas on the dog.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and so the dog has many choices at that point. The dog may jump into the ocean and drown the fleas. The dog could shake the fleas off. It's not the dog's responsibility to figure it out. It's the fleas that are going to be off the dog in one way or another. Even if the fleas drain the dog dry, um, they all die,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
to me, the biological system itself, which is the planet, with all the humans that are part of it, we are part of that biological function. We've reached a size and a configuration that demands there be a new organization. So
yep,
I think without question, there's already a transmutation going on. You see this with global warming
yep,
or global climate change. The system is changing because we've polluted and with different substances so much. And the choice then becomes how do we work together so that we can accommodate for the change that is occurring? That's been the
yes.
part that's been the most just honestly mind blowing to me. And I have some sense of why this is difficult. And COVID actually helped me see some of this. Um, we have 97% of the scientists in the US and globally as well have been very, very clear that global climate change is a real thing,
Yep.
right? It's not a question. When
No.
97% of the scientists come to this conclusion, the fact that there are people on the planet who still think that they are incorrect is mind-boggling to me. And so I've sat with this for years because I look for patterns. This is part of my academic work. It's what I've done for years. I like to say I think in constellations. So I love to see how systems work together. But what I watched during COVID helped me understand why folks have had such a hard time with global warming.
Mm-hmm.
Global warming is bigger than COVID. COVID
Yes.
was a isolated experience. Now, that doesn't mean there couldn't be more. We're all very connected, but we've had other biological incursions in the past, different plagues, different illnesses that have swept through the world. But even with just one, with something we couldn't see that was at a global scale, our brains are not designed for that.
Right.
We're the fleas that are maybe one group of fleas is on the head of the dog, one group's on the tail, one group's
Right.
on the belly, and we haven't really talked to each other enough or connected and said, "Oh, look here, let me tell you what I see going on in the tail. Let's see what we have going on in the belly. What's going on in the head? What's going on in the right foot?" Um, we haven't connected enough to understand, and our singular brains don't have the capacity to get it. It just feels
Got
too
it.
big, too challenging.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I have a very mixed response to AI. I've been using it quite a bit to try to understand what's possible in it. So there's part of me that thinks like the way that folks go to this, like, oh, I'll just have it write something for me or I'll have it think for me. Terrible idea. In fact, it tends to go to mediocrity when you do that. So the idea
Oh,
gets worse. But what gets interesting is when you try to map systems that have too many variables for one human to hold. So I think humans are good about holding about 5 to 9 things at once. That's
okay.
actually a very small data set for a whole planet. So when we can use the AI to help us see the difference or the different pieces that are moving, the moving parts, it gets a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, this place we're in is absolutely an evolution. Um,
Yes.
I don't know that there's good or bad. I think there's going to be both.
Both.
Um, and I think a lot of that is up to us to say we need to change the system. we need to change together. And some of that is very small. Some of that is the work you see in kind of self-care and you see in this personal development world of, hey, let's just sit down and talk to each other. Let's
Yeah.
connect. Let me see you. Let you see me. Let's find each other. But some of it is also actually thinking together at a collaborative level. And it was one of the places where I got excited during COVID about what's possible for human beings. In my lifetime, and I'm 53 now, I have never seen scientists collaborate together on anything the way that they did
Mhm.
during COVID.
Right.
I watched that and went, COVID's terrible. The amount of people are dying, awful. But the capacity to take this model of collaboration that is global out of the capitalist system that says, who gets the patent for the medication that will,
Exactly.
instead of saying that, this greed-based health of a system, if we were to say, we're going to co-patent this, right? We're going to share it with the world. We're going to have a global science agency that everybody shares real time what they're learning. To me, that was a model of where we might go.
Yes,
And
I that wouldn't that be lovely? That would be completely lovely. And there's still that greed system that's in place that, as a system, at some point it's going to have to die away for the next model to really come into being and anchor, a collaborative model. If you keep building on a rotten foundation, your house is still going to collapse. That you have to clear the foundation so you can build anew and better
let
and
me
more
tease you a little bit
sustainable.
about this notion of foundation. That is not the foundation that we're built on. So that's more like the middle of the apartment complex, like the
Okay.
floor. The oldest form of economics that I can find is the economics of the communal table. The
Oh, I
place
like
where,
that.
yeah, where we came together as small villages, tribes, and everybody got to have a serving before somebody went back. That, when you talk about the foundations of human existence, that's the only way we were able to build culture, right? We had to trust each other that if we come together, I will share my resources with you and you will share yours with me in
Well,
ways that
let's do
are,
that, Scott. I like
yeah.
that.
And that's actually not an uncommon tradition, right? That's happened globally.
Right.
Um, Communal wealth was a much more understood phenomenon for most of human history. So we've had this blip in the radar. This is why it's really important to understand the cultural trajectory. We've had lots of different places where this hasn't worked well, but we've had a lot of places where it has, where families have come together, where small communities, and you see that happen in Minneapolis. You see that happen when there's tragedy in places like Venezuela, which, for those who maybe don't have, may listen to this much later, the really terrifying earthquakes just happened in Venezuela a few days
Yeah.
ago. And
Yeah.
and the global community has surrounded them and supported them and just been quite amazing. So I think it's really important not to claim that the foundation of human existence is this extractive relationship with nature and each other. That's a seems to be a relatively new phenomenon depending on how I'm researching it. You might say 1200s, um, you might say kind of industrial revolution. It's hard to tell because there's this beautiful quote that the future is here, it just has arrived um, incrementally. Like some of us have got a
You're
little of the future,
right.
got a little of the past. We don't all work at the same time frame, but we have examples all through human history, and literally the our existence as we know it now came out of collaborating with each other.
I love that.
So
I
to
love
me,
that.
that's the foundation we work from.
I
And
love that.
it's not a return to ancient culture. It is a return to an ancient understanding of the way nature works. Because all we have to do is look at the way nature works, because we're part of nature. And when we're doing things that are outside of the way nature works,
Hmm.
probably we can expect some terrible consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
And we're living through it.
Yeah.
Scott, thank you for this. Thank you for this entire conversation. I so appreciate you going here and then coming back here and us doing the dance together. I enjoy everything and I've learned so much from you today. I thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And keep doing what you're doing because it makes a difference. It really does. I appreciate that. So,
Oh, well, I have just to say, this has been an absolute pleasure. I told you at the beginning of our conversation that for me, the criteria of whether these calls are successful, these podcasts, are do we have an interesting conversation where we got to think some new thoughts and connect to each other and enjoy each other? And all of those boxes have been checked for me. You are
oh, yay. Me too.
the question
And
fascinating. Yeah.
And you've given me a lot of food for thought to that, like I said earlier, it's shifting perspective, and I'm all about shifting perspective so
Mm,
that I can see more clearly and expansively. So thank you so much.
mm,
So, you guys, Scott Mills is on Substack. You can find him at dr period doctor Scott W Mills.com and find his Substack. And there's a lot more you're doing that we didn't even get to talk about because I want to talk about the book at some point because I read parts of it and I'm
oh,
loving
you
that.
read Cowtails.
Yes, and it feels like another a better Jonathan Livingston Seagull kind of
Oh,
excursion. So anyway,
thank you.
so for future, I love it. So in the meantime, I'm just going to end with, and so it is, namaste.
Mm.